Good morning, kids, and welcome to church this morning. This morning, I'm going to talk to you about one of my favourite people from the Bible. And in a minute, you're going to see a skip from Acts 9.
Saul was a Jew who hated followers of Jesus so much that he would hunt them down to be brought to trial in Jerusalem. He would even seek to murder them. Saul believed he was a righteous man because he knew God's word and obeyed laws. He was eager to kill the Lord's followers, so he asked the high priest to write a letter to the leaders in Damascus to be allowed to go there and bring the Christians in the city back to Jerusalem to be put to trial. Now Saul and his men went to Damascus. On his way there, a light flashed from heaven all around him, and he heard a voice say, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Saul cried, "Who is this?" And the voice said, "I am Jesus. Go into the city and you'll know what to do." Saul got up, but he was unable to see. He was blind. His men helped him to walk into Damascus, and he stayed there 3 days, not eating or drinking. Meanwhile, the Lord spoke to a man named Ananias in a dream and told him to go to a street called Straight Street, and in a house there he would find Saul of Tarsus. Ananias had heard of the man named Saul and how he had persecuted Christians and questioned the Lord. But the Lord said, "Go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. I will show him how he must suffer for my name." So Ananias obeyed and found Saul in the house where he laid his hands on him. Something like scales fell from Saul's eyes. Saul arose, was baptized, ate food, and his strength returned. After spending time with the disciples in Damascus learning, then he went to the synagogues and started preaching that Jesus was the Son of God.
Of course, the person that I'm talking about is Saul. And Saul then went on to preach all over Damascus. And this angered the men who were just like the way that he used to be. And they wanted to kill him. And so what they did was they watched and waited. But the followers that he had in Damascus, they waited until night time and they lowered him in a basket over the wall. And Saul went safely to Jerusalem. A few chapters after this, Saul went to the disciples in Jerusalem, but the disciples, they had heard it. They knew what Saul was like. They knew that Saul murdered Christians and they wanted nothing to do with him. However, God sent a man called Barnabas, and Barnabas spoke to the disciples, and this helped the disciples to accept Saul, and Saul then changed his name to Paul, and he became a disciple with them, and he went about boldly speaking the name of the Lord. In today's skit, we saw how Ananias had had a dream. Do you remember what the Lord said to Ananias? He said, "Go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine. Do you know what a vessel is? Actually, a vessel is just an empty container that can be filled. Here's one. You probably might have spotted it in the skit with Ananias. And I could put these flowers into this vessel or I could put water into this vessel. An empty vessel could also be called an instrument, but not an instrument like a guitar or a piano, an instrument like a tool. Because a tool is useful, and the Lord himself said that he would use Saul as a vessel. You know, Paul faced many difficulties, like being imprisoned, he was shipwrecked, he narrowly escaped death more than one time. But Paul said that he would do everything he could to save people so that they would get to know the Lord. If you look here, I actually have 2 eggs. So this is an egg that came from my fridge. So it's just a normal egg. I could crack it, but I don't want to do that. And here is another egg. Can you see? So this egg I've put into this glass, and I have filled the glass with vinegar. And if we think of the egg a little bit like Paul, and then we think of this liquid like the Lord. So the Lord is like the liquid and Paul is like the egg. Now, when we take this egg out, we can see that it's a little bit like in the story when the scales fell from Paul's or Saul's at the time eyes. And if you have a look here, I can rub this. Can you see? It's like the scales are falling off. Isn't that amazing? The scales are falling off this egg. Just like in our story today, like how the scales fell off Saul's eyes. Before Paul met the Lord, he was a really mean man. He crucified Christians. But after the Lord called Paul to be a vessel, Paul was chosen. And you know, Paul then went on to write many of the books of the New Testament. And God used Paul in so many ways. And Paul brought so many people to the Lord back in the New Testament times. And even today, if you were to go and read through the books that Paul has written in the New Testament, you will be challenged and you will find out things that will help you in your walk with the Lord as well. So I hope that you enjoyed the talk on Paul today and the skit, and you learned a little bit about who Paul was, or Saul, and what he did for the Lord. And we will see you next week.